Ladies and gentlemen, it is almost game time. The great debate is about to begin. I'm John Avalon, Political Director of Newsweek and the Daily Beast and CNN contributor, and on behalf of Patch.com, who are our hosts tonight, along with South Carolina Radio Network, ETV, and WCBD, welcome to the one, the only debate of this congressional season, which is also the only congressional race going on in America right now. So now, you know what that means. It means that the eyes of the nation, or at least the political junkies in the nation, are on this room tonight. And if you're live tweeting the event here or at home, watching on HuffPo or C-SPAN, use the hashtag SC1. That's how we're going to be talking about the debate on Twitter. But you know, the national conversation on this election has been a little bit off topic. I think some folks in the national media seem to think this is a race between Jenny Sanford and Stephen Colbert. Now, we know that's not the case. And just to highlight that point, the moderators tonight have chosen questions that focus on policy, not personality. That's right. And I want to introduce those moderators to you tonight now. We've got Sean Drury, political editor of scpatch.com. Give it up. You can clap now. Ashley Bird, news director of South Carolina Radio Network. And Brendan Clark of WCBD, anchor. Now let's go over some of the ground rules. It's a 75-minute debate. There was a coin toss earlier, and Elizabeth Colbert-Busch will go first in a 2-minute introduction, starting the debate, both candidates. Then the moderators are going to ask 12 series of questions. Each candidate will have a minute to answer, and then 30 seconds for, well, maybe a rebuttal, if necessary. Make sure you turn your cell phones off, or at least the ringers off, please. Also, keep your applause to when the candidates are announced, not during the debate. This is important. I know it's tempting, but try to let the candidates speak for themselves. Well, I think without further ado then, let's begin with the introductions of people who need no introduction. Former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford, first up. And South Carolina businesswoman Elizabeth Colbert-Busch. Now, before we begin, let's get the Pledge of Allegiance. I like to see you're all fired up. All right. Now, before the debate begins, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. We're going to be led by Lindsay Street of Patch.com.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch. Yes. We begin tonight with opening remarks framed around the question, what do you consider your greatest professional accomplishment and why? You have 2 minutes.
First, I'd like to thank Patch.com, South Carolina Radio, and the Citadel for inviting us here tonight for this very important conversation. And to you moderators, thank you very much for pulling this together for us. Thanks very much. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. What is my biggest accomplishment? 27 years ago, I began my career in business. And during that career, I started off making $6 an hour. When I was making $6 an hour with 3 small children, 3, 5, and 7, I knew that it was not going to be what I needed to have a successful life for me or for my children, to be able to provide for my children. So what did I do? I went back to school. I finished my education. And when I finished that education, I found myself working at one of the top 10 global ocean carriers in the world, where I rose in the ranks from clerk to director of sales and marketing. I was responsible for 20% of the North America continent's profit and revenue. And it was an incredible, incredible journey. What that did, though, what happened after that was it opened these incredible doors for me. I was recognized and became the first woman chairman of the South Carolina Maritime Association, and I was also named the top 20 most influential women in transportation. I did that by understanding business. I did that by understanding business plans and profit and revenue. I will take that tough, independent businesswoman, business career, and I'll go to Washington with the help of all of you. Thank you.
Governor Sanford, the same question. What do you consider your greatest professional accomplishment and why?
I would echo Elizabeth's thanks to every one of you for being here and participating in this, and to each of you as moderators and to Citadel at large. I would say when you look at professional accomplishment, I would have to zero it in to really a 20-year track record of trying to do something about the way the government spends, and in particular leadership on that front. Because I think that a lot of people will talk about it, but all too few folks will actually lead on this sort of relentless pursuit that government has for your pocketbook or your wallet, and its implications in every one of our lives, whether on the job front or on the finances front. And I would look back to my time in Congress, and you know, there was a short patch. Out of 40 years of history, a very short window wherein budgets were actually balanced in Washington, D.C., and I happened to be part of the class of 1994 that was instrumental in bringing that about. When I came into the governorship, there was a $1 billion shortfall, and we were able to close it through a whole lot of work with others. And you combine all those efforts, and what they add up to is what the National Taxpayers Union talked about in rating me #1 in the entire United States Congress in efforts to limit federal spending and limit federal taxation. It adds up to Citizens Against Government Waste rating me the same in all of the United States Congress. It adds up to the Cato Institute rating me as the financially most conservative governor of the United States of America. It adds up to you know, being the first governor of the United States of America to actually turn back stimulus money at a time when it was anything but popular. But I simply make those points to underscore a larger point, which is I think that if we're ever going to get our arms around a whole host of issues in Washington, D.C., what we need is leadership. And what has been shown in my time in Washington and in Columbia is a consistent willingness to lead on financial matters.
Thank you both very much. This first question is on the topic of immigration, and it goes first to you, Governor Sanford. And then you'll have a chance also to answer it with 1 minute each first. Senator Lindsey Graham and the bipartisan Gang of 8 have offered an immigration plan that offers a path to citizenship, rewards workers and researchers who have advanced skills, while mandating increased border security. Would you vote for the Graham bill? Why or why not?
I would not vote for the bill in its present form, and here's why. I think that we can all learn from history. It's that constant process of course correction by which we get things right. And if you look at the last big immigration bill in the United States of America, it was the Missoula-Simpson bill in 1986. And basically it offered amnesty for 3 million illegal workers in the country at that time for the trade-off of enforcement down the line. Ronald Reagan signed that bill into law in 1986, and unfortunately, the enforcement part never came. As a result, here we are having a conversation years later with 11 million additional undocumented workers here in the United States. And so I think you simply have to reverse it, which is to say you have to begin with enforcement first before you begin any conversation on amnesty. And I think that there are some really simple nuts and bolt things that you can do. You know, there was I guess a 52-mile segment of the 2,000-mile border was approached with a very high-tech border fence. I think a simple border fence, not high-tech, is the first step. And I think, and I'll get into it, I guess, in rebuttal because it's at stop now, but a whole host of other things that we can do that would, I guess, impact the degree to which illegals are wanting to come here.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch.
Well, first I'd like to say that I am in full support of the Chamber of Commerce and their position on immigration. This is very important that we understand that we have 11 million people here, and with our financial position right now in this country, we cannot afford to send 11 million people back home. What we need is really tough, fair immigration reform, and that means you pay your taxes, you pay your fines, you learn to speak English, and you get in the back of the line for the pathway to citizenship.
That would mean also that you would vote, as stands, for the Graham bill.
I would be supportive of the Graham bill. I would like to look at it obviously in detail because I've never been in politics, but I would definitely support what I've heard about the bill, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, would you like to add something to that, Governor Sanford?
I would say this is part of a much larger national debate, and you know, I suppose I'll make this point in several different ways. I think that one of the problems here is looking at the nuts and bolts of what works or doesn't work with regard to immigration. And so if you look at the high-tech worker component within the immigration bill, I would be completely supportive of that component. The idea of American taxpayers paying for somebody from India or China to come here through the H-1B visa program and then sending them back home doesn't make sense. But to have a more robust program in terms of guest workers, as we did from 1946 to 1964 in this country through the Becerra program, I think is something that does make sense. So I think it still needs additional tweaking.
As a question, as a matter of follow-up, when it comes to the need for workers and guest workers, you have a plan in place as well?
As I just mentioned, from 1946 to 1964 through the Becerra program in this country, we had a robust guest worker program. Ultimately, labor unions shut that down. And I think it was a real mistake with regard to, again, what we then saw in terms of illegal immigration in this country. So what I'm saying is, I think we need to go back to, one, enforcement first, securing the border, and secondly, looking at some of the drivers of illegal immigration, which would include where we are right now with regard to guest worker program.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, do you agree or disagree with his characterization of the union's role in that?
What we need to do is we need to secure the borders, and if I may repeat myself, we need to have a very tough and fair immigration reform, especially when we're talking, the Chamber of Commerce is very concerned about seasonal workers, and the Chamber of Commerce obviously is very concerned about students who come to this country that we teach, and then they go home. It's about keeping the best and the brightest, and we need to support the Chamber of Commerce in this effort, and that's what we're going to do.
Our next subject is the port. I want to talk about the Port of Charleston a little bit. Such an important issue to so many people that really depend on it. The Port of Charleston has been named as a priority in the President's budget. Both of you have said it is critical to the state's economic future. How would you convince a congressman from, say, Iowa, some other place in the country, to vote in favor of funding the deepening of the port? We'll start with you, Ms. Colbert-Busch.
Very happy to answer this question after 20 years on the with the maritime industry. This port is a huge economic engine for this state, and it's a huge economic engine for the country. We are getting ready to open the Panama Canal, and these ships are going to come through that have to go to a natural deep sea port that can take the ships, and so we have to be prepared. We have to make sure that we dredge, and we have to make sure our infrastructure is in place. So what we want to do is we want to convince our colleagues that this is important to us as a country and as a nation. We are going to be ready to accept those ships. We have to be ready for the global growth that we're going to experience. And I'd like to make note that Mark Sanford, my opponent, voted against dredging for the port, voted against the bridge, and voted against everything, and he was the only congressman to do that.
Governor Sanford.
I would just humbly suggest on that one that if it was not simply a political statement at this moment, I don't think that you would have written me a $500 check after I left the United States Congress as I began to run for governor.
response, though, your response.
No,
though, she
what I'm
said-
saying is I don't think it must have bothered her that much, given the fact she wrote a $500 check in support of my candidacy. I get it that it bothers her now. But I guess my simple point would be this. With regard to the port, you know, I take the exact position that Tim Scott does, which is to say, you know, what we ought to do is recognize that this is a national resource. I mean, there are only 4 ports on the entire East Coast that can go past post-Panamax depth, and Charleston has the cheapest price per $1,000 of custom weight value. I mean, 27 cents, which is about half or a third of the cost of some of the other ports up and down the East Coast. So this is a national resource, and one of the things that I think I would bring to bear is seniority. As a former member of Congress, you step in ahead of 60% of the Republican caucus, which could make a real difference come 2015 in actually trying to make the argument before others in this nation on the significance of the Charleston port.
I'd like to rebut.
30 seconds. You had 30 seconds.
You know, Mark, I'm really glad you brought that up. I was hoping you would, okay? Because you and I both know we've known each other for many, many years, and you knew what my role was at OOCL, and you knew that I was responsible for the industry and what I did and what my role was in governmental affairs with the company. So you and I met on a number of occasions. You said you would support trade. You said you would support the dredging. You said you would support all the things that we needed. And in fact, you didn't tell the truth. You turned around and did the opposite.
Well, if I remember right, this was about, let's think about this. I was in the United States Congress. I voted exactly as has been roughly described. Not quite, but roughly described. And what's interesting is, in the wake of that, if it really bothered you, why would you write a campaign check in support of my candidacy and run for governor?
Okay, Mark. Yeah.
Move on to the next topic. Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic.
Sure.
We start with Governor Sanford.
Sure.
This question is on health care. Supreme Court ruled last June on health care. Both houses of Congress have voted on the Affordable Care Act, and the President has signed it into law. What specific aspects of the bill do you like, and what would you change?
Let me be clear, I don't like the bill. And I would vote against it were I a member of Congress, and I would vote to defund it if I moved to become a member of Congress. And I say that for a couple of different reasons. I'd say, one, if you look at the Government Accounting Office numbers, what they show is it will add $6.2 trillion to national debt. And the Congressional Budget Office numbers have already shown a doubling in its cost. There are 20 new increases in terms of tax with regard to Obamacare. And I think what's really, really significant is it turns upside down the whole Hippocratic Oath. And part of the reasons that we have superior health care in this country relative to a lot of other places around the globe is that there's a direct relationship between the doctor and the patient. And for the first time in American history, we would be basically turning that upside down in terms of the Hippocratic Oath and who a doctor really works for. I would say secondly, or thirdly, it is really turning aside this larger American tradition we have wherein government doesn't tell you which products you're supposed to buy. In this case, you have a mandate in terms of American citizens being required to buy a product in a way, a good or a service in a way that they never have before in this country. And so for a whole host of reasons, I'm opposed to the bill, actually.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, the same question to you. What specific aspects of the bill do you like, and which ones would you change or vote against or overturn if given the opportunity?
Obamacare is extremely problematic. It is expensive. It is a $500 billion higher cost than we originally anticipated. It's cutting into Medicare benefits, and it's having companies lay off their employees because they're worried about the cost of it. That is extremely problematic. It needs an enormous fix. What's good about it? Well, you can't be denied for pre-existing diseases. Your children can stay on your health care till they're 26. You can't discriminate on a woman. You can't charge a woman more for their health insurance just based on gender. And in final point, I would also, again, fully support the Hospital Association and the Chamber of Commerce who support Medicaid expansion. It's good business, it creates jobs, and we need it.
Governor Sanford, to add on what you said or to respond to what Mrs. Colbert-Busch said.
Let me respond to what you just said, because I think this is one of the reasons so many of us in the First District have been wanting to have a debate on issues. Because while I hear what you're saying, in this case, for instance, if I wasn't there, but the Washington fundraiser that was done for you was hosted by 37 Democratic members of the Congress. Every single one of them supported and voted for Obamacare. And if you look at the DCC commercials right now that are running on airwaves across the Lowcountry, it's done in support of people that have pushed for, advocated, and brought about Obamacare. Nancy Pelosi is running hundreds of thousands of dollars in ads. This is an important point. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in ads. Yeah. And what's interesting here is that she has been a major force in the advocacy of Obamacare. And so it's not believable to me that someone will put $1 million. I'll come back to the point.
Governor Sanford, could you talk about what you would do to deal with the problem of health care in this country?
Absolutely. I mean, for instance, one of the things that I think is wrong with Obamacare on this front is, for instance, you cannot charge a young person less than 3 times what you charge an older person as a part of the actuary tables with Obamacare, which means actuarially it's going to blow up, and there will be a big tax coming down the line for the rest of us, I believe. And so what I believe is you got to go back to what we tried to do when I was governor, which was to actually empower individuals with health savings accounts. You know, you go back to the wage and price controls of World War II, it was at that point that employment and health insurance became linked. I think you have to de-link those ultimately and move more to a primary payer system if you ultimately want to fix health care and health care inflation.
May I rebut?
Now,
I'm going to rebut.
Now, Mrs.
Okay.
Colbert-Busch,
Okay.
you have an awful lot to respond to.
Okay.
There, I understand that.
Okay.
But you only have 30 seconds, so
Okay.
I'll
Make it
So
fast.
choose which item
Okay.
you'd like to respond to, please.
Okay, first of all, I want to be very clear, Mark. Nobody tells me what to do, except the people of South Carolina's 1st District. And secondly, if you've been looking at the commercials and paying attention, I am a fiscally conservative, independent, tough businesswoman, okay? And then if you also notice, one last point, I push back on the Obama budget. So let's talk about independent and reaching across the aisles and being reasonable. Thank you.
And what I might say to that, no? Okay, well, it was going to be fun.
I would ask on the behalf of the moderators and the audience that everyone do show respect to both candidates, please. And for fun, let's talk about entitlement reform. This question is first for Mrs. Colbert-Busch. Most experts agree that in order to cut the federal debt, there needs to be entitlement reform, other than reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. What are specific ways that you would suggest to lower long-term costs to Social Security and Medicare?
First, let's talk about Social Security. Social Security will still be solvent for 20 years. And what we need to do, again, in reaching across the aisles, is have a bipartisan approach like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, to come together as the parties to talk about how we're going to move this forward and openly have a dialogue about it. Social Security is still solvent for 20 years, and we need to address that. Okay. Now, when we're talking about Medicare, again, we have a grave concern. Medicare is not even allowed to negotiate pharmaceutical contracts like the VA is. That's $24 billion to our bottom line that we could negotiate and level out that playing field. We need to address those costs. We need to address overbilling. We need to address the impact that Obamacare has to cutting Medicare benefits to pay for Obamacare. It is a complicated issue, obviously.
Governor Sanford, same question.
I think you need to move to a block grant system with regard to Medicaid. I look at Dr. Darby over here, and what I think he could tell you at the Children's Hospital is that in many cases, the way that money comes from Washington, D.C., is that he's handcuffed in trying to do what he's done over the years in providing for young folks. And so I think that we did that with welfare reform. I was one of the members of Congress that actually helped to bring that passage about. I think we need to do that with Medicaid dollars as well, because at the end of the day, I was a governor, and I saw firsthand the degree to which our health care needs can be at times quite different in South Carolina than those in California or Nevada or other places around the globe. So I think we need to move to a block grant system. With regard to Medicare, I think a premium support program actually makes a lot of sense. And with regard to Social Security, I think we ultimately have to move to a system of individualized accounts, because Fleming versus Nestor said in 1960, Supreme Court decision, that none of us have any legal claim whatsoever to our own Social Security money. And what that means is that the Social Security so-called trust fund has been robbed from for a long while now, and I think that money needs to be protected.
I could not disagree more. I would not be in favor at all of privatizing Social Security. If we had privatized Social Security in 2008 with the huge economic crash that we had since the Great Depression, our elderly would have lost half of their investment. That would have been devastating.
I would respond that just as commercials don't make it so, I would say what you're saying doesn't make it so. And I would say that respectfully in this way. If you actually look, prior to 1983, at the county government level or the state government level, you could, in essence, create your own Social Security plan. So if you were to go to Brazoria, Matagorda, or Galveston counties down in South Texas, they created their own plans. And they would not let people take direct stock market risk, to your point. They could only go into annuity. And if you look at the actual rate of return for those workers in South Texas, they've done considerably better in terms of rate of return, and the money has been protected and not raided from in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Our next topic is federal spending. Last week, sequester-related furloughs caused major delays in air travel, as we all know. However, Congress voted to offset these cuts to the FAA. How would you have voted, considering there are low-income and military families being impacted by the other aspects of sequestration? Governor Sanford.
I mean, that vote was ultimately a vote about flexibility within the Federal Transportation Authority. I mean, what was wrong with what happened with TSA is a 4% cut led to impacting 40% of the flights. And there were a whole host of articles around the country talking about, wait a minute, this is in essence bureaucracy gaming this system for maximum impact to try and produce a political result. And so I would absolutely voted for that flexibility that was entailed in that bill.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, how would you have voted?
I think the sequester was poorly executed, to be perfectly honest. Let's start at the very beginning. When we look at just very basic cost cuts and spending, look at Medicare with $166 billion in waste, fraud, overbilling, and inability to negotiate our pharmaceuticals. The sequester was $85 billion. When we're talking about getting our fiscal house in order, we need to look at everything from cutting spending to what are our costs. So during the time when we're having all this fiscal spending, fiscal cutting, and back to the days where everybody had a furlough in the state, everybody was losing their jobs, and we were pulling our belts in, when we talk about fiscal spending and we talk about protecting the taxpayers, it doesn't mean you take that money we saved and leave the country for a personal purpose.
Everybody needs a little bit.
She went there, Governor Sanford.
I couldn't hear what she said. Repeat it. I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Answer the question.
What was the question? Okay, but anyway, on the sequester, I mean, I'll go back to sequester. Here's the problem with sequester, which is, I think it's a real problem to not be specific on spending cuts, because all the people supporting you, those 37 members of Congress, consistently fought against me when I tried to infuse spending discipline in Washington, D.C. I mean, with all due respect to Nancy Pelosi, whose name I will raise again, But she is. She's spending $370,000 right here in the 1st Congressional District. With all due respect to her and others, they have not pushed for financial discipline in Washington, D.C. So to disavow the $1 million that's come in support of your candidacy from people who have pushed for more spending in Washington, D.C., to me doesn't make great sense.
Would you like to respond?
When we're looking at fiscal responsibility, and I have been very specific about some items that I would do to help cut the spending, and one of them would be the duplicative services that we have. There's $150 billion in duplicative services. Let me give you an example. 3,100 data centers for 12 agencies. That's completely unnecessary. We have to look at cutting these costs and getting cost efficiencies. So I have been very specific.
Thank you.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, the next topic is education. The performance of America's students in grades K through 12 trails that of most other industrialized countries. Do you think what is needed is a change in the approach to funding or fundamental reform to the way our children are taught?
I'm a very proud parent of children who went to public school. Public school is critical to the success of this nation. It is the way to the American dream. We cannot turn our backs on public schools, and we need parents need to have choices, charters, magnet schools, public schools. We need to have that. So I would certainly disagree with Mark. Sorry about this. I have to disagree with you again. I would not support the voucher system, because what happens if you give a voucher system, you're taking that funding away from the public schools and then leave them with the financial responsibility and impact of doing that. We can't do that. So we also need to focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, because we're going to make things again, and we need to teach our children from the time they're kindergartners all the way up through high school, technical school, and college. The science, technology, and engineering and math is going to be the focus for the 21st century jobs, and we need to drive that. And actually, there is a program right here at the Citadel that's driving that I've been a part of.
Governor Sanford, same question to you, and if you'd like to speak to vouchers.
Sure. What I'd say is, as governor, we pushed to increase the base student cost every single year that I was governor, and that went to public schools, because I believe that that's an absolute, underpinning to how folks get educated. So where the vast preponderance of folks get educated in this state and in this country. And we did a whole lot more than that. I mean, we pushed for the first charter school bill of its kind in the nation to offer an increasing array of choices. We pushed for the first of its kind in terms of early childhood education in a number of the plaintiff districts in South Carolina. We actually proposed a tech prep program because the reality is God makes us all different. And some people may have an aptitude in working with their hands. They shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens. And so what we said, let's celebrate that. If you get your electrical or your plumbing bill, they're not second-class citizens. And so what I'd say is, we push for an array of different choices, and I stand by that. Because at the end of the day, I go back to the reality of what I know as a parent, which is we've loved our 4 boys equally, but each one of them was very different from day one. And to have an array of different choices out there that reflects the diversity of different kids that are out there, to me is something that makes sense.
And again, the diversity and how children are different is where the public schools come in with charter, magnet, and public schools. But when we have a state Supreme Court that says that our Constitution provides a minimally adequate education for our children, and we're sending our tax dollars to Washington, D.C. that are trying to come back here for education dollars, and we turn them away, there's something inherently wrong.
Governor Sanford, with your time, admittedly it's only 30 seconds, could you speak to your feelings regarding the Department of Education?
Well, I want to address what she just said, which is there's something inherently wrong in believing that we can solve a problem of too much debt with yet more debt. And fundamentally, that debate at the time of the stimulus was about that very point, because we have a $16 trillion debt, arguably a $50 trillion debt if you include all the contingent liabilities that go with this government. And the idea of let's borrow some more money from the Chinese so that we can send some money to South Carolina or other states is not something that made sense to me at that time. And I ultimately think that we've been vindicated based on the employment numbers that you see right now in the way that it didn't create the level of employment that a lot of people thought that the so-called stimulus would bring about.
Okay. We have added the thunder for effect, by the way. I want to talk about jobs creation and workforce development here. Many local companies are saying they're just having a difficult time finding qualified employees for a variety of positions here. What role do you think the federal government should play in preparing our citizens for the 21st century economy? We'll start with you, Governor Sanford.
Well, as I just mentioned ago, I think that the government has a real role in helping people to have the tools in the toolkit to be competitive in the 21st century. I mean, I've long talked about Thomas Friedman and his flat world and the way in which we're in a global competition for jobs, capital, and way of life. And there are only two ways of raising productivity. One is through capital. One person on a backhoe can dig a lot more dirt than 50 people with shovels. But the other way is through what's gray matter. I mean, in other words, intellectual capital instead of capital. And so we pushed hard to offer an array of different job training programs through the tech school and otherwise that would help folks to be tooled for whether it's Boeing right here in Charleston, South Carolina, or whether it's Google up in Berkeley County, or again, a whole host of different businesses that have come to our state. What we saw during my time in the governorship was more cumulative investment in South Carolina than during any other in South Carolina history. $24 billion of cumulative investment, I think ultimately tied to that larger notion of giving workers more in the way of options.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch.
Job creation is about private companies. Jobs are made by private companies and small businesses. The role of federal government is to create conditions or infrastructure that will help private companies, will help entrepreneurs develop their technology, develop their commercial, develop their IP, move at the commercial market, and create jobs. When we talk about the role of government creating conditions and infrastructure to support that growth, I want to remind everyone again, and Mark, you voted against the bridge, you voted against the dredging, you voted against job training, and all of those things are needed for job creation. So this is what we have to do. That's the role of government, to help private companies and help entrepreneurs have the conditions and the infrastructure to be able to be successful.
Is the federal government doing enough right now to support that growth?
Well, I think in this area, I think we're very lucky. And that's why this is so unique in the 1st District, because we are in a very unique position for job creation, with education combined in it, with a public-private partnership, and building a knowledge economy, and I'll be happy to address that later.
Governor Sanford.
I would say it'd be a gross mischaracterization to say that I voted against the bridge, port funding, or anything else because I disagreed with the method of getting money to the bridge. I absolutely did not disagree with the idea of getting money to the bridge, and I think that's a very important distinction because I was in essence against earmarks before being against earmarks was cool. I think with regard to helping small businesses, and I have to say this with due respect to my opponent in this race, you want to help a small business the most? Get government out of its way. From a regulatory standpoint, from a tax standpoint, when I talk to small businesses across South Carolina, what they tell me most often is, these increasing taxes that Pelosi and friends oftentimes are trying to level on them absolutely hurts our ability to compete in the global marketplace.
You get 30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Job creation, I know job creation. I've done it. And Mark, let's be very candid. When you were governor, 98,000 jobs were lost in this state, and 37% of our traffic through the port left and went south to Desvana or somewhere else. That's not job creation.
I would, again, respectfully disagree, and I would say this. If you look at the numbers, our state was 15th in the nation in employment growth during my governorship and 9th in the nation in labor force. And I think I would stack it up against so many different states out there with regard to where we were on that front and the cumulative investment. Again, $24 billion, more investment than any other time period, 8-year time period in South Carolina history. So I think that we worked awfully hard at job creation, and I would go back to the ingredients of job creation. They are the things that we worked on in terms of the first marginal cut in South Carolina's history, the largest recurring tax cut in South Carolina's history, first of its kind workers' comp reform, first of its kind Employment Security Commission reform, a lot of things that were, in essence, building blocks to a better playing field for businesses large or small in this state.
Thank you, Governor Sanford. If you'd like to reply to that, you have 30 seconds.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
We are going to stay on the topic. We are going to stay on the topic of job creation, though. And let's start with this. Boeing is bringing more than 8,000 jobs into South Carolina, so here is a two-part question. First to Mrs. Colbert-Busch. Did the NLRB step over, NRLB, thank you, overstep its bounds when it tried to block Boeing's approach to expansion in South Carolina? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, this is a right-to-work state, and they had no business telling a company where they can locate.
Would you like to respond to that, sir?
I'd love to. I mean, this is a very interesting answer. I mean, because you've taken $70,000 from labor unions. And I think that's important, whether one does or doesn't. What's important here is that when you actually were accepting one of those checks and talking to a group and you say, I want to be the voice for labor unions in Washington, D.C., to me, it is not exactly decrying where NLRB was on the Boeing issue. And I think the Boeing issue is absolutely critical to ultimately job creation here in the Low Country in the 1st Congressional District.
May I rebut that?
Yes, you
Thank
may.
you.
30
Okay.
seconds.
First of all, Mark, what you're saying is just not true. Things all can be taken out of context, and everybody knows that. I am proud to support and live in a right-to-work state, and I am proud of everyone who has supported me. Absolutely. So what you're trying to do is to divert the attention away from your platform with me when you know this is just not true.
So you would disavow your words?
No, I would not disavow my words. I am proud of representing everybody in this district, and as a matter of fact, I took a pledge only to the people of South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, and that means to represent everyone, Mark. Everyone.
I completely agree.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
I respect that, and I want to do the same. But here's the problem. There are certain gut check issues where you have to go yes or no. And when the NLRB, the very union that brings the suit before the National Labor Relations Board that would have shut down Boeing, gives you a $5,000 check, to me, I would say, I want to represent everybody, but I don't want to represent the union that is trying to shut down Boeing here in Charleston.
The second part of this question goes to Governor Sanford, and you'll have a chance to respond as well. Local elected officials, including members of Congress, were critical in negotiating the deal that brought Boeing to Charleston. One of your most common criticisms of government is that it shouldn't, quote, pick winners and losers. But Boeing has received more than $200 million from South Carolina taxpayers to help it move here. How is this not a case of picking winners and losers?
Because our primary focus has consistently been on underlying soil conditions. That's why there was the first cut to the marginal income tax rate in South Carolina's history. That's why there was the largest recurring tax cut in South Carolina's history. That's why there was first of its kind tort reform, workers' comp reform, Employment Security Commission reform. I could go down a long litany of different things that were fundamentally about bettering the soil condition for a business large, medium, or small. But in addition to that, you do go after the elephants, if you want to call it that, in the world of economic development. And we consistently did that because I was in a governance role. There are tools in the toolkit. in terms of a Department of Commerce whose job is to tell the South Carolina story. And I teamed up with Bob Faith and Joe Taylor and a whole host of others, both at the local, regional, and state level, to absolutely go after economic development. And we see the successes, which is cumulatively $24 billion. And I want to single out a friend who I see right there. Enzo Caiazzo is in the room. And I dealt with him in early negotiations in the Alenia deal, along with Tom Risley at Vaught, and those guys made the original $600 million investment that I would argue is the reason that Boeing is here in the first place, and I'd single you out.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch.
Incentives are very important to economic development, and when you have your competition around you in every state around you, you have to consider incentives. The incentives that were given to Boeing will be returned tenfold in employment and jobs and revenue. That's really important, and I'm a supporter of incentives to bring companies here. I also know that our assets are part of that incentive, and one of our largest assets is the Port Authority that brings cargo in and out of here that, Mark, you continually voted against for the dredging.
It's just not true, but anyway, we'll have that discussion later.
You have a few seconds if you'd like to respond to that now.
Yeah, I mean, if you had, well, I mean, we've had a whole series of different forums and debates across the Lowcountry, and we had a lengthy conversation at the Propeller Club. I see Jonathan Hoffman here. He was one of the different contestants in that. And what we talked about is where we stood on port deepening, port infrastructure, and I think with very little in the way of exception, all of us were supportive of it, and I am supportive. I had conversation with folks at the Harbor Pilot Association today about the whole issue of port deepening and how important it is. I mean, it's something that I believe in because it's part of the lifeblood of this community, making sure that trade comes in and out, and not just this community, but frankly, economic development across the state as a whole.
Yeah. We're good.
Governor Sanford, next question to you. Sure. Let's talk about incentives of a different kind, specifically the incentives that representatives of the House and Senate receive. Our incentive structure in that area seems screwed up. Special interests play an outsized role in funding candidates and pushing forth legislation that they're most interested in. Do you think there needs to be campaign finance reform, and how will you ensure that the special interests that have supported your campaign don't disproportionately influence your vote when matters that matter to them come up?
I mean, I respectfully point the direction of your question toward my opponent, because she's received more than $1 million from special interests, Democratic special interests across this country in support of her candidacy. And I think that some of those are quite specific in their focus, whether that's the Democratic Congressional Committee, whether that is Nancy Pelosi's PAC, whether it is Act Blue, which has funded more than $400,000 to her campaign. I mean, I think that those are a whole host of specific interests that I think are not ultimately aligned with where people come from in the 1st Congressional District. As to your notion of campaign finance reform, it's something that I've consistently fought for. You know, prior to my becoming governor, my predecessor had vetoed the campaign finance reform bill twice that in essence made South Carolina the Wild West of campaign finance, wherein you could give unlimited and undisclosed amounts to a political party or to a political caucus. I said when I ran for governor, if I got elected, I would vote to change, I would support changing that. We ultimately were able to change that. I've consistently believed in campaign finance reform and this idea of disclosure, of letting people know where your money is coming from, which is why I think it's relevant that she's gotten $1 million from different outside groups.
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, can you speak to your feelings on campaign finance reform broadly, and also to the role that you think special interests play or don't play?
This is going to be a very short, sweet, quick, to the point answer. You ready? I have made only one pledge. I have not signed any pledges to anyone. I have not filled out any questionnaires. My only pledge and my only special interest are to the people of South Carolina District 1, period.
Governor Sanford, can you speak to the issue of signing pledges, such as the one that Grover Norquist has asked many members of Congress to talk about?
Sure. And I do want to address what Elizabeth just said. It's not believable to me that somebody gives you $1 million and expects nothing in return. It's just not believable to me. And in this instance, you know, I would have to say, I mean, I don't think Nancy Pelosi gives $370,000 expecting her not to vote for Speaker. I mean, I would be curious as to, as a special interest pledges like Grover Norquist, I would say this. I firmly believe in less taxes, less government, and less spending, and would gladly, and did gladly sign a pledge not to go in the opposite direction. And what's interesting about that is I have a 20-year history where I was actually rated #1 in the entire United States Congress in doing just that. So it would come as no surprise that I would sign a pledge saying I'm not going to vote for a lot more in the way of spending.
Can you respond to what Governor Sanford said?
Mark has been very honest today. He signed a pledge.
On to the next topic. We're going to talk about a social issue. Back in June, the Supreme Court is expected to rule on 2 cases related to gay marriage. How do you hope they rule? And if the House of Representatives subsequently attempts a constitutional amendment to reinstate the Defense of Marriage Act, how would you vote? We'll start with you, Mrs. Colbert-Busch.
First, I want to say that I am a supporter of full equality. This is a matter of civil rights and equal protection under the law. That's what this is. And quoting Dick Cheney, freedom is freedom for everyone.
Governor Sanford, how would you vote?
I voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. I mean, I was there in the United States Congress. And it's interesting that the President Clinton signed that bill into law. It's interesting that Obama was supportive of that law until just a few months ago, as was President Clinton until he changed his mind as well. So my position on that has been consistent. But I think at the end of the day, this whole issue of gay marriage has less to do with gay marriage than it does really to do with the tradition of our country in not letting Washington decide things for us. Because I think it's interesting, you know, 9 states plus the District of Columbia now condone gay marriage. Isn't that really the way it's supposed to work in this country? To say, we're 300 million folks strong. We're not going to let judges out of Washington, D.C. decide a whole host of controversial issues. Marriages have historically been the purview of states, and the idea of letting states continue to decide what they do or don't want to do, to me, is consistent with the notion of federalism and consistent with a 200-year tradition in this country.
Governor Sanford, when you were in Congress, right, you voted for the Defense of Marriage Act and to impeach President Clinton for an extramarital affair. Would you vote those ways again?
Well, I would reverse the question to you. And I would say this. Do you think that President Clinton should be condemned for the rest of his life based on a mistake that he made in his life?
Ms. Colbert-Busch, 1 month ago you tweeted to a supporter, both pro-choice and in favor of marriage equality. Do you still believe that? If so, why was it deleted?
I already answered the question on marriage equality. On abortion, let's call the word what it is. This is what the concern is. This is an incredibly delicate, sensitive, personal question that is between a woman, her family, her doctor, and her God.
Your feelings on that? Governor Sanford?
Yeah, I just go back to the question that you just raised, which is why in the world would you delete things that were on your website if you believe them? I mean, I go back to the whole notion that we just talked about with regard to campaign finance reform, which is ultimately a conversation about transparency. And so this idea of saying, I tell you what, I'm going to take off things that were in the web page now that the primary has passed, to me is inconsistent with this whole notion of transparency in government and transparency in debate.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the next question. This one is for Governor Sanford first on the topic of gun control. Earlier this month, a bill that would have prevented someone like Alice Boland from getting a firearm was defeated in the U.S. Senate. This happened despite the fact that an overwhelming number of Americans and people in this district, including the GOP-led legislature, favor improvements to background check laws. How would you have voted on background checks? Governor Sanford first.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we got to look at context. You know, there were 88,000 folks that failed the criminal background check last year. 40 were prosecuted. We have a fundamental problem with prosecuting the existing laws that are on the books that then raises a larger question. If we're not even prosecuting the current laws on the book, why are we going out to create yet another law? And so I would say I would have voted no. I would have supported the Coburn Amendment. I think that Tom Coburn's amendment made a lot of sense with regard to avoiding a national database and registry. I think that any time you talk about, I would have supported, keep in mind, Lindsey Graham's proposal with regard to Alice Boland. His proposal was specific to either cases of involuntary mental institutionalization or the case of Alice Boland herself, wherein she threatens the President of the United States and then declares insanity as a reason to avoid incarceration and penalty, and then later goes out and buys a gun. What Lindsey proposed with regard to that specific Alice Boland amendment, I think made sense. But what I don't think is we need another far-reaching bill in ultimately impacting the Second Amendment.
You have a minute.
Thank you. I am a really proud defender of the Second Amendment. This is our culture. This is our DNA. I do support expanded background checks. We have got to keep guns out of the criminals and the mentally ill. We have to do this. This expanded background check was for commercial sales only. And it would be fair that if you are one company that has to do the background check, shouldn't it be fair across the board for all companies that are doing commercial sales? So that would be a bill that I would support.
Would you like to add anything to that, sir? To be clear, you would have voted against the bill, but you did like a piece of it. Is that right, on the background check?
I like very specifically what Lindsey had originally proposed, specific to the Alice Boland case. I like very specifically the Coburn Amendment. I would have voted no on the overall bill, because at the end of the day, I don't think the Second Amendment is in there to shoot a duck or a deer. I mean, I think it's ultimately the teeth behind every other right that we enjoy as Americans, and therefore you need to be very careful on treading upon rights that were guaranteed by our founding fathers.
Would you like to add anything?
No, and again, as I said, I am a proud supporter of the Second Amendment, absolutely. I mean, this is about our rights to bear arms, and I would never vote against the Second Amendment, but we do need expanded background checks. We do need to address the issues like Alice Boland. We need to have this background check to protect our children.
Can I interject there, though? I mean, the problem with suggesting that is, for instance, the 37 Democrats, congressmen and congresswomen that supported your candidacy, all were against what you're saying with regard to Second Amendment issues. The very groups funding your campaign are against those Second Amendment issues. So I don't understand how one can, on the one hand, say that you're independent, and the other hand, suggest that I'm not going to listen to what they have to say, though they're funding my campaign.
Well, and Mark, actually, you're not listening what I have to say. I told you no one tells me what to do. I'm an independent businesswoman, and I will reach across the aisles.
Thank you. Sean?
Governor Sanford and Mrs. Colbert-Busch, you're each running for an office to be part of a group of people that are among the most unpopular in the country. In the most recent winter poll, only 15% of South Carolinians approved of the job Congress was doing. What would you alone do to improve the atmosphere and effectiveness of Congress? We start with Mrs. Colbert-Busch.
There's a lot of blame to go around up in Washington, D.C., and clearly it's a difficult job. But the most important thing to do is we have to realize we have to talk to each other. We have to reach across the aisle. We have 25 years of business experience, negotiating contracts, being responsible for millions and millions and millions of dollars. You don't go to a negotiation table wanting to get everything all on your side. You negotiate, you collaborate, you're reasonable with each other, so at the end of the day, when that contract is done, the negotiation is over, and you've cut a deal, everybody feels like it's a win-win for the best interest of your district, your state, and your country.
Governor Sanford.
You know, at one level, I would continue to do what I've done for a long time, which is to say that, you know, when I was in Congress, I worked with Charlie Stenholm on Social Security reform. He was a Democrat from Texas, and we worked awfully hard on a bill together. You know, when I was governor, I worked with the governor of Montana on a bill against Real ID. He was a Democrat, I was a Republican, but we found, again, common sets of ideas that we believed in. Herb Kirschman was in the Democrat from up toward Rock Hill when I was governor, and we worked very, very hard on trying to sustain some vetoes. Actually saw more vetoes sustained, $260 million worth in my last year than during, you know, any other year in my governorship. You know, I've consistently tried to reach across aisles. I mean, Sierra Club actually, not exactly a Republican group, endorsed me in my second run for governorship because of what I'd done in reaching across the aisle on land conservation and a whole host of other issues. I would secondly just sort of bring, well, 5 seconds, it's a longer, I'll come back to it, okay?
Mrs. Colbert-Busch, if you could talk about what will govern your decision when you're thinking about when to compromise and when to stand your ground.
When it's in the best interest of my district, the state, and the country. We have got to come to the middle. We have got to be reasonable with each other. It's about reaching across the aisles, collaborating, and making sure that our district, our state, our country, our constituents are not impacted by the behavior of the people in Washington, D.C.
To finish your previous thought, Governor?
Yeah, I was just going to say the second part of what I think I would bring to bear is you don't go through the experience I had back in 2009 without a greater level of humility. And what I would say is that willingness to sit down with a Republican or Democrat alike and say, you know what I believe what I believe the facts support what I'm suggesting, but you know, let me just sit down with you and let me just a little bit better understand where you're coming from. I think it's incredibly important to forging conclusions in Washington, D.C., whether from the Republican or the Democratic side.
Governor Sanford, that concludes the questions portion of tonight's debate. You now have 2 minutes to make your closing remarks.
I would say this. We're at an incredible tipping point as a civilization. And I think that if we don't get spinning right in Washington, D.C., there will be real consequences in terms of the value of the dollar. I think there will be real consequences in terms of inflation that has historically been the silent robber of the middle class. I think there will be real consequences in terms of the American dream and the opportunity that is historically afforded. And so I've gotten into this race with the hope of taking what I've learned in Congress, what I've learned in the governorship, what I've learned on my way up, what I've learned on my way down, all of it, and applying it to what I believe is the great debate of our civilization, which is indeed, how do we get our financial house in order? Because if we don't, there will be real consequences for every one of us. I, would say that it really does matter how we fund our campaigns. And this notion of $1 million coming in from a whole host of different groups across this country that are Democratic and left-leaning in nature to support my opponent absolutely does matter in this race, because what it says is, whose voice will you carry to Washington, D.C.? I have a 20-year record of trying to stand up for the taxpayer. And as I mentioned, a whole host of different merit badges in my accomplishments and efforts to do so. But I think that when you think about this larger notion of whose voice will be carried, will it be Nancy Pelosi's voice? Will it be a labor union voice? Will it be a whole host of folks that have come in at an unusual level to fund my opponent's campaign? It has to raise this larger question of how not only do we get our financial house in order in Washington, D.C., but whose voice is going to be carried as we attempt to do so. Thank you again for your time tonight, and I would ask for your vote, at least not necessarily everybody. I get it how the room's divided, but I would ask for everybody's vote, their consideration, and I again appreciate you taking the time that you did tonight to come out and listen. Thanks so much.
And Mrs. Colbert-Busch, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you, moderators, for the chance to talk. And thank you to the Citadel and Patch.com and to South Carolina Radio. I appreciate it so very much. Here's the fundamental difference. This is not the end of our time as we know it. The sky is not falling henny penny. As a matter of fact, our best days are ahead of us. So here's what we have. I've been around the district from South Santee all the way down to Hilton Head and fingered into the counties. Everybody has different issues. Everybody has different concerns. Everybody has the need. They want to move ahead. We're not going to look behind us. We're going to look to the future. And the three things that have bubbled up around the entire district are three major things. They want to get the fiscal house in order. Absolutely, it must be done. And to get that done, I want to tell you all tonight that I will take a 10% cut in my salary when I go to Congress and hand it back to the taxpayers. Secondly, thank you. Secondly, I only have 2 minutes. Secondly, it's still about the economy. It's still about job creation. This is what we do. This is what we know. And third, everybody's saying, I need someone I can trust. So what are we going to do? We're going to get our fiscal house in order, and at the same time, we're going to prioritize our dollars. We're going to invest in our community with the assets that we have, and they're incredible. They're education, private-public partnerships, coming together for a knowledge-based economy for the 21st century. We have the Medical University. We have the College of Charleston. We have the Citadel. We have Trident Tech. We have the Silicon Harbor. We have this Clemson University. We have all of these things that can create an incredible knowledge-based economy to support private industry, to support entrepreneurship, to support job creation and IP. Our best days are ahead of us. So I ask you on May the 7th, please, I'd be honored to have your vote, and let's move to the future. Thank you.
That concludes tonight's debate. We would like to thank the Citadel, WBCD, and everyone who joined us in person online. Let me try that one more time. That concludes tonight's debate. We would like to thank the Citadel, ETV, WCBD, and everyone who joined us in person and online. Governor Sanford, Mrs. Colbert-Busch, best of luck now through May 7th.